I really feed off of people's energy, and just being around people that wholeheartedly believe in what they're doing and are fighting the good fight and are doing the good work and just unapologetically are pursuing those pursuits. To me, that gives me so much life. To me, that gives me so much encouragement, and it makes me want to run a little faster every time that I see that.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, creators, and disruptors who are fueling innovation in emerging markets across the country. I'm Tyler Kelly. I'm here with my co-host, Leanne Buchanan.
Hello, everybody.
And we're excited because tonight we're joined by Hector Mujica. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Hector, we met a couple months ago now, and we just had this amazing day and experience and I was like immediate friends with you and your lovely wife. But I want to talk about your platform, the organization with which you're affiliated. But first, starting off with a little bit more about who you are. The question I love to start our conversations off with is, what is your superpower and how did you discover it?
I think my superpower is connecting people and connecting with people, being empathetic towards people. You know, my wife, Tara, tells me all the time that I'm highly empathetic, which means that it's code for that I cry a lot. And I do, but I do feel emotions really heavily and I really do feel the weight of people's journeys, the weight of people's trajectories. And I think that's allowed me to connect with people in really meaningful ways. And by extension, enable them to connect with other people in my network. And I think that empathetic connector tends to be one of my superpowers.
I love that empathetic connector. Now that had to start somewhere. So talk to us about your origin story. When did you start to notice and experience that you were a bit of an empath and you connected with people on an emotional level? How did the way that you were raised either contribute or maybe pull that out of you?
So I grew up in an immigrant household. My family immigrated to the U.S. when I was fairly young. I was 5, from Venezuela originally. And my parents, in the same way that many of our families have done in the past, many other families, they took the bold step of saying, hey, we're going to go pursue opportunity in a new space, in a new foreign space that we haven't entered before. And they picked up their lives, my mom, my dad, myself, and my younger sibling, and we moved to Miami. And, I think that opened a lot of doors and it opened a lot of opportunities for me to develop my identity in many ways. That was a really crucial stage for me in my life. Even though I was young, I had to straddle a lot of new things that I otherwise would have not had to face. I had to understand how to operate in a new climate with new norms, new languages, new people. And I think that was really formative for me. I think back to that moment in my upbringing, and I think back to how that was formative in enabling me to almost become a cultural ambassador, enabling me to straddle a world of two different worlds and trying to bring them together and connect them together in many ways. And when I think back to my connecting ability, I think it comes down to some of those formative experiences early on when I had to learn how to navigate those environments. It wasn't optional. And in doing so, I had to be able to quickly connect the dots between different experiences, different people, different expectations, and how I showed up in those spaces was also really, really instrumental. So definitely learned a lot from seeing my parents navigate that, and also from me having to face those moments myself.
One of the best tools of navigating multiple worlds is code switching. And oftentimes children of immigrants, people of diverse backgrounds, really hone their capacity to code switch. So talk to us about your experience as a cultural ambassador, a code switcher professionally, starting perhaps with the role that you have now and maybe some of the more formative professional experiences that you've had.
Yeah, so right now I have the privilege of leading part of Google's Philanthropy, google.org. And I lead all of our work around economic opportunity. So that is thinking about ways that we can be facilitating greater pathways for upward mobility for historically underserved and marginalized communities. We tend to do that both around pathways to jobs. How can we, again, enable historically underserved communities with the right skills they need and the right pathways to meaningful job opportunities in the digital economy? And access to capital. How can we, again, support the small business owners and the entrepreneurs with the right resources that they might otherwise not have access to, the right tools and the right capacity building elements that could really enable and propel them to be in an even playing field, in a more even playing field with their peers. And that role in and of itself, I think I've really had to lean heavily into that notion of being a connector, or almost like a cultural ambassador, coming from an underrepresented community into tech. I've been there for 10 years, and 10 years ago, I mean, tech is still, has its challenges ahead of itself from a diversity and inclusion perspective. 10 years ago, it was much more grave. So entering into this space from South Florida enclave, and where, I was in the majority, even though I was in a broader national context in the minority, in the local context of South Florida, where Latinos are in the majority, as a minority majority community. For me, it was a rude awakening to, one, leave South Florida and go to California, go to the Bay Area. And two, do that by entering into a major tech company where Latinos made up less than 2% of the company. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of that context of adaptation all over again. It almost brought me back to some of those immigrant roots and kind of that arrival in the US and having to code switch and adapt to these new environments and navigate new foreign environments, almost to a more acute level, in the sense that, at least in South Florida, I had peers, other immigrants that had a similar experience to mine, and I could lean into that. I think entering tech, I was one of very few people in the tech space, one of very few Latinos in corporate philanthropy at Google, and I think that really forced me to have to, again, pioneer and navigate in an entire new way. And that continues to evolve. I think now I see that, now that, we've been able to, again, really do a fantastic job at google.org in terms of having a much more diverse team. And I think we're fairly balanced now, which I think it's wonderful, especially when you're doing philanthropic work, when you're trying to tend to some of the grave injustices and needs of marginalized societies. For that work to be done and executed by people that are reflective of the communities we're trying to help, I think is super significant and very, very important. It's imperative. But beyond that, I think now we enter into this space where, again, being an ambassador plays a role, because we have to be almost ambassadors between the communities we're serving and this corporate entity that is trying to navigate how to best engage and serve those communities. Mm-hmm. So that concept of almost that ambassadorship concept keeps showing up in various stages of my life.
Google's doing a lot on the, the DEI front, but not just from, we're talking about it. I see with, and I forget the exact name of the Google product, but the education piece that you mentioned of small business owners and really kind of just going into the community and teaching, job. Here's how to apply for a job and to use Google for research and these types of things. That's part of your program.
Those are all part of our extended peer teams of initiatives that we're doing. But yeah, they're all conjoined as part of initiatives that where we're trying to really elevate how to, one, best use the platform of Google to connect people, to elevate information and help facilitate pathways. And two, how are we also supporting kind of the broader ecosystem beyond Google, right? Google is not the end all be all. We know there are other innovators out there that are pushing forward solutions that are equally as important for us to bridge some of the gaps of injustices and in society. And that's where my team comes in, through our grant funding, through our volunteering, through our in-kind support, to really help some of those thought leaders, some of those social justice warriors to really have a broader, stronger platform.
It's amazing. I mean, that's huge that it's more than just like giving away advertising, right?
It's powerful. And I think it's important, right? I think we both want to celebrate the platform that we have within the company at Google, but we also want to transcend that in many ways.
That's awesome. Tell me about some of your biggest challenges in that space, specifically in like getting feet on the ground to help in those communities.
I think when it comes to some of the work that we're doing in community, some of the biggest challenges tend to be, how do we bring the whole of the company along for the journey? I think most of my team, like I mentioned earlier, they all come from the community. They all have a foot in the community. They all have experiences in the community, which I think it's instrumental in how they see the world, how they engage with grant making, with philanthropy work. But more important than that, we also have to bring kind of the broader whole of Google along for the ride, which I think it tends to always be an interesting challenge to navigate. We tend to think of our philanthropy as catalytic. So for us to truly be leveraging Google's philanthropic arm in a catalytic way, we have to at the same time be thinking about ways that we can bring the whole of Google along for the ride and unlock additional platforms, resources to enable that impact that we're aiming to have. One example that I'll share, we did some work around supporting minority small business owners through an organization called OFN, Opportunity Finance Network, that is a network of CDFIs. And again, one of the biggest challenges that we've seen in the small business ecosystem with diverse communities has been a lack of access to capital. Mm-hmm. Capital, there's too many barriers that are prohibitive to allow those communities to meaningfully access capital and grow their business, start a new business, and in recent times, even be able to survive a global pandemic that is leading to way too many small businesses that are minority owned to shut down and close their doors. Through this intervention, we were able to initially commit to $10 million in Google.org funding. And through that initial commitment of Google.org funding, we were able to unlock $125 million of Google balance sheet resources that were then also deployed through OFN. To us, that's a great example of that catalytic impact, right? How can we, through our actions and through the design of thoughtful programs and processes, invite the greater whole of the company, or in many cases, other companies, other funders, government, other entities to join in that journey and help scale and grow solutions?
It's interesting. Brian Stevenson, who became more famous when the movie about his life came out, talks a lot about how it's so important for us to be proximate to the issues. When you're proximate to the people, you become more empathetic and more understanding of the issues. The one thing I always observe about you is you've got this lens of equity and this lens of justice that kind of rings through everything that you kind of approach. But I'm curious, where did that come from? Do you have a specific event or experience in your life that you would say catalyzed your very clear equity and justice lens that you bring to your work?
It's a great question. I think my wife, again, tends to remind me all too often that maybe I over-index in my inclination towards justice, which is always a helpful reminder, right? I think we have to find the right balance. Two things. First of all, Brian Stevenson is fantastic. He's one of our grantees, and we supported him early on with funding for the build out and establishment of the Equal Justice Initiative. Google.org, again, by extension, has been involved in the racial justice movement since before it was in vogue, since before everybody else was funding it, and all the great movement that we've seen over the past 12 to 18 months, which, again, I think we need to celebrate and acknowledge. I think it's important. I think it's just the beginning. More needs to be done. Google.org had been investing in those spaces, in criminal justice reform, in racial equity for the past 5, 6, 7 years, which I think is incredibly important to acknowledge, because, again, going back to that point about being a catalytic funder and leveraging our funding to take risk capital, this is what we're doing when we fund untested ideas and ideas that we truly believe can shift the equilibrium, like we did with Brian, like we did with the Equal Justice Initiative. And we're able to put that seed fund and stick to that funder, stick to that individual who we see has tremendous potential to disrupt. And eventually they do disrupt, right? And not to take credit for that as a funder, but I think any time that we can join someone and take a risk and take a bold bet on someone, we're really, really proud when we get to see the end outcomes of that. going back to your question around justice orientation, I think I don't think I can point to a single event or a single moment in time that I think oriented me in that direction. I can probably point to a sequence of journeys or sequence of moments. My dad is in tech. He's fantastic, and he was my initial exposure to the tech sector when I was very, very young. Which again, I think is an outlier, right? As a minority, as a Latino, as someone that had a parent that was deeply involved and also engaged in the tech sector, before the tech sector was what it is today. And the exposure that gave me, and it enabled me to eventually carve out a pathway into tech. That's something that I need to, one, acknowledge, but also I acknowledge for it being a privilege, because it's something that not many people in our communities have. By extension of that role, and by extension of the role he played in my life, he's also always been very much a community-oriented person. He's a deep person of faith. He's been part of the clergy in our local church ever since I can remember, and been deeply motivated and dedicated to fighting injustice in society. I think in many ways that has really resonated with me. I mean, he used to drag us out every Thanksgiving. Instead of being like normal people and having a normal Thanksgiving dinner, we'd go to like the homeless shelters or the homeless camps. And I remember going to those things, dragging my feet. Like I was like, why can't we just be like every other family and just do normal things without having to engage in these things that, at the time when I was a kid felt like so bizarre. Like, why are we going out of our way to do this? And now when I reflect on it now as an adult, it was transformative. It was foundational to the way that I now perceive and engage with the world. And I'm very, very thankful for that, for the role that he played and the foundation that he laid for myself and my siblings. And I think that really, truly has been instrumental in helping, one, expose me to the many injustices that exist in our immediate societies and the world as a whole. And two, to remind me of the capacity that we all have to play a role in trying to find solutions.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to switch gears, if I may. What excites you? Because the work that you do is so important and it's probably very inspiring, but you as an individual, like, what are you excited about? What do you do for fun? What gets you maybe out of the box to do something completely outside your comfort zone?
People excite me. I think being around people, I tend to be a really high energy individual, right? So I think, when you get me going, I'm going to start talking fast. I'm going to be, I definitely resonate with extroverts in many, many ways. Even though the older I get, the more I'm like, maybe I can stay home tonight. I don't need to be going out. But I've historically been very, very extroverted. And I think I really feed off of people's energy and just being around people that wholeheartly believe in what they're doing and are fighting the good fight and are doing the good work and just unapologetically are pursuing those pursuits. To me, that gives me so much life. To me, that gives me so much encouragement, and it makes me want to run a little faster every time that I see that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get to the lightning round, one thing that I think we need to talk about is that, Google's California-based. We're here in Miami. And post-COVID, you're one of those people that have moved back to Miami, but you're still working for the California tech company. So talk to me about why the move back to Miami and what that means from a broader perspective.
I think, I'm one of many boomerangs that are coming back to South Florida, and I'm quite excited that we have the flexibility and the ability to do that. The past 18 months, I think, have been quite tragic for a lot of people. And it's just been so heartbreaking to see the loss of life and the state of affairs at a global level that this pandemic has brought us to. But one silver lining that I also have to acknowledge is that it almost gave us a pause. It enabled us to maybe take a break from the race that we've been running and reflect on truly what's important and how do we want to center our lives going forward. It definitely did that for me. It definitely did that for my wife. And I think it enabled us to take a step back and make a decision on where we want to be, where we want to be investing, where we want to be setting deep roots, and what are spaces that we're excited about. And being from South Florida, having our families in South Florida, and seeing the momentum and the moment in time that South Florida finds itself in right now, I think it was a perfect mix to draw us here. Thankfully, we were able to benefit from the newfound flexibility that the tech sector is providing to its employees. And I was able to move my role over to our Miami office, which has been a fantastic, huge blessing. But more than that, I think it was just so exciting to be in a space that is blossoming and growing into its own. And we're just excited for what's happening in Miami, and we want to be a part of it.
You know what time it is?
I know what time it is.
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, let's see.
Give me a good one.
I know we've had some tough conversations, not tough, but like fascinating, deep conversations. I'm like, oh my gosh, the stakes are so high. I'm pulling a Tyler. Okay. Ooh, this is good. What moves you to tears or gives you goosebumps?
So going back to what I told you guys about earlier about being deeply empathetic, that also tends to hit me particularly hard in movies. I don't know what it is about movies, but I just immerse myself pretty much into any single movie. And more often than not, everybody around me will look at me and I'll be the only one crying, and I'm feeling the movie and I'm so deep in it. And people are like, oh, okay, it's not that, it's a comedy. What's going on? But so I think movies, I do go deep and I do empathize particularly well with movies for some reason. So that tends to move me to tears quite often.
And this is the season, or getting ready to be.
That's right.
At least at my house, it's the holiday
Hallmark.
movie
Yep.
season.
Oh, those Hallmark
Lots of
movies,
tears
those
in
get
store.
you.
What can you do that you could not do a year ago?
Ooh, what can I do now that I couldn't do a year ago? I'm finding a lot more flexibility and freedom in acknowledging that I don't need to have all the answers and that I don't need to have all the solutions. And I think that's been a natural evolution of my role and myself and my career and the place in life that I find myself at. But for at Google, they have this kind of philosophy around not trying to play the superhero. Like if you're trying to play the superhero, you're more often than not doing yourself and the organization at this service, in that you're not allowing the cracks and the gaps to surface and therefore be fixed. And I think for the longest time, I've conceptually understood that, but I've been incapable of putting that into practice. I think over this past year, for a wide range of reasons, I've been able to get myself more comfortable with the idea of let things break. We can let balls drop every once in a while. And in doing so, we can elevate and surface problems and fix them rather than just trying to like duct tape it, and move on. So letting things break and letting balls drop.
Awesome. What did you learn from your biggest regret?
What did I learn from my biggest regret? That's a good one. That's a hard one. I think one thing that I'm learning right now, and I don't know if I'll tie this to a big regret, but one thing that I am learning right now is how to be uniquely generous with my praise and really measured in my criticism. I think I've had a tendency to find shortcomings or flaws, and I think we can all easily complain, but it takes a lot of intentionality to hold back and rather elevate praise and elevate compliments. And I'm trying to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Where have you found peace?
I tend to find a lot of peace in nature. And I think that was something that I really cherished about my time in California, was how accessible the mountains and outdoor spaces were. There's something just powerful about being in mountains. And now I'm finding that again in the ocean. I think I'm kind of getting reacquainted with the ocean, getting reacquainted with the sea. Last year, I begun to practice sailing and fell in love with it. And that's getting me out into the water more often than ever before. And I'm also finding a lot of tranquility out at sea.
Last question. Well, second to last question. But what would you ask a fortune teller?
Ooh. do I really need to do my wife and I really need to have a baby or not? Should we have a baby or not? We're in that debate right now, and it's a never-ending debate. Team, like, we have a dog, isn't that enough? And she's team, we need a baby. So that might be my question for the fortune teller.
I don't think you need a fortune teller to answer that one. Happy wife,
Valid.
happy
That's
life.
right. Oh,
Wow.
man.
And on that note, social media, how can people get in touch with you? Obviously, we know how to reach Google, right? But how about you?
LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the best resources for me. HD Mujica is my Twitter handle, Hector D. Mujica on LinkedIn. I've disavowed from Instagram earlier this year. I made a big intentional decision around that, and Facebook. And I don't think I'm going back. I feel so liberated. It's been now almost 12 months. Wow. I feel free.
Amazing. Well, Hector, this has been such a fun conversation. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Innovation City. If you like this episode, you can find more episodes at innovationcity.co or anywhere where you watch or listen to podcasts. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye.